multi-stakeholder initiative, are looking to increase awareness and engagement both with industry, with the policy actors, and the young consumers to increase awareness and action on wastewater in the apparel and textile industry. Now, there are a series of fireside chats that we have had when we look at this issue. And there is a very nice pattern we see. In the first chat, we understood, we heard from experts that how there is a need to relook at our whole behavior and attitude towards wastewater. Is it really a waste resource? Sorry, is it really waste that we need to manage? Can we not consider it as a precious resource that can be considered as an input for the industry and consumer? So there was a need for a mindset change. There is a clear need for multi-stakeholder collaboration because it is not anyone's issue. It requires concerted action by a lot of players, whether it be consumers, brands, industry, government, innovators, academicians, and everybody needs to be part of this conversation. Now, continuing on those dialogues, we had followed up with what are the technologies, some of the technologies that are available today, at different scales, because when you talk about managing wastewater in the industry, it is a complicated conversation, especially for the textile industry and the heterogeneity in the wastewater that is seen. So while we delved into what are some of the solutions, some of the challenge, some of the policy actions that could actually support more uptake of technology, one thing that really came up, that can we also look at the chemical management? Can we look at good chemical practices when it comes to managing the water? Does it really have to be looked at only at when the wastewater is generated? And that there is a lot of merit in pulling this conversation earlier into the process. So keeping that in mind, we are pleased to have with us two experts who will bring in different perspectives, one from greener and cleaner chemicals, and one from, how brands are looking at this conversation of managing wastewater in their value chains, how they can support this dialogue, and what is it that good chemicals can play when we look at the wastewater management. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Rijit, the CEO for Center for Responsible Business, to host this conversation with Chadash Dogru, who is the Environmental Sustainability Program Manager at H&M. Chadash has a master's degree in textile engineering and has more than 10 years of experience in environmental sustainability. He has been leading H&M India's projects on energy, water, chemical, and waste for the last few years, and is responsible for developing and implementing strategies, ensuring that program-related activities and initiatives at facility and industry levels are executed. Now, this includes resource efficiency, renewable energy, water-related, chemical initiatives such as the zero discharge of hazardous chemicals, and environmental management systems. So welcome, Chadash. And joining him in the conversation, Mr. Karun Tyagi, the Vice President of Business Development and Environmental Sustainability at ProClean Technologies. He's a dynamic professional managing leadership role with a rapidly progressive career span of over 17 years and has experience in handling business development, strategic marketing, business planning, chemical management guidelines, among other domains. He possesses rich cross-functional experience in both the textile and chemical industry, and his experience includes spearheading production of garment washing and operating a unit as a profit center. So Rijit, over to you.
Thank you very much, Devyani, for the introduction, and welcome friends Chadash and Karun to this conversation. Very pleased to have you both here as we try and learn together with you on not just the challenges, but also the solutions and the business case for wastewater management, industrial wastewater management going forward. The idea, of course, is to look at what has worked and what hasn't worked, and what are the kind of supporting factors that are required to make what it takes as we move into a better wastewater management regime. So thanks again for giving us your time. So if I may start with you, Chadash, and you lead this work of H&M, which is a world-known brand, not only because of the quality products, but also because it has been working on a fair bit on various aspects of sustainability and providing solutions in its value chain. So just want to sort of get your perspective on the challenge of wastewater management in your value chain in India, and also beyond, uh, and understand from you how H&M is trying to address this problem in the value chain here, and if there are some other good practices from elsewhere in the region which you feel might be useful for India. So if you can share your perspectives on that, Chandash, over to you.
Sure. Thank you, Rigid. Thank you for the invitation. I think this is a very important subject. Maybe I can start with an overall overview about the textile industry and the usage of water. Water is our biggest resource, and we need that. We are using a lot. Unfortunately, we are also polluting it a lot. So we are in the top 3, I guess, as far as I know, when it comes to consumption as well as pollution. So we have a huge responsibility on that. When it comes to H&M strategy for the wastewater, actually starts with the water management, because in all types of waste, it can be solid waste, domestic waste, or water, whatever you say. The solution starts with the consumption. You need to consume less and also consume smart in some cases. So our main focus is starting with that. We have projects, water efficiency projects, which we focus less water usage, which will lead us not only less water consumption, but also less wastewater, less energy usage, less chemical usage. So we really see water as a unique subject. When you work on it, you get lots of other benefits as well. As I said, with the water efficiency projects, we want to decrease our water footprint. Definitely with water smart technologies and waterless technologies we are supporting, and we are trying to show this as much as with our designs and products. Uh, Serious focus on chemicals, which will lead us to use less water, is one of the focus for sure. Recycling, we can talk more in the coming minutes, because consuming smart is basically that, you can maybe in some parts you cannot consume less, but if you consume the same amount again and again, that will be quite smart and wise. So the next step for us is the again, wastewater management. After we use less as much as we can, then the second part is more about the regulations and our minimum requirements. We focus on the quality of the water that's being discharged. We are focusing on the ETP's, effluent treatment plants functionality, because what we see for a long time, maybe we focus on too much on the tests, which is the final inspection. And when you see a result, it's already too late. You already have not good results at the discharge water. But with the ETP function assessment, we focus on the management system so that the suppliers can find out and control as well as improve the systems as soon as possible, so that we can have a better results at the end. Of course, overall, we will talk about more about recycling, but the idea again with the wastewater management is to have recycling as much as possible. That's what we see in the coming years. It will come more and more, especially for India. And regarding the good practices that we see overall, I mean, the biggest thing is, I mean, there are regulations, very strong regulations in India, but one of the biggest bottleneck, I can say that, there are states, and all the states have different awareness when it comes to water. Some states already are in the front, lots of regulations, lots of enforcements, but in the meantime, functionality is a question. But in some states, even that regulations are not there. So uh, I mean, I can give also some examples from other countries, but we also have lots of good examples within India, which we can replicate in other states. But overall, what I see, online tracking for quality, online tracking for water consumption, common ETP and industrial zone perspective, those will be very supportive. Rainwater harvesting to decrease the freshwater consumption from the ground, and of course recycling. I mean, for especially for the last two, I see India is leading, and but even it can be more. I mean, it can be better in that sense with the functionality. But overall, what I see is we need to focus more as India, because water scarcity, water pollution, everything is we feel today. Even maybe when we talk about energy, it's a little bit long term, and now it seems a little bit more in the priority. But the real problem, real short-term crisis will come from the water, and we are aware, and we want to solve as much as we can.
Great, thanks for that. Thanks, for highlighting the risks related with uh, the lack of a proper water, a comprehensive water management system, which does not only focus on the end of the pipe, as they say, but also at source. And you spoke about a number of initiatives from within India, whether it is industrial symbiosis or common ETPs, or rainwater harvesting, water stewardship, which have worked in different parts of India. I think we'll come back to you on how to create this as a campaign, and as an industrial campaign, as a campaign, as Devyani told us. This project is all about creating that buzz around what has worked, what can work, and how should we make a demand for it, as consumers, as players in this in the market. And I think that's where our focus should be, and that gives a good segue to get to go to our next our other expert, Karun. Karun, you've been working with industrial wastewater and specifically chemicals for a fairly long time. How do you see the sort of the business case for responsible chemical management sort of evolving in India? Do companies get it? And if they do, what's that pitch that people like you probably would make, or others need to make them really see chemical as an element in their balance sheet, hopefully in the green. So if you can share your thoughts there.
Yeah. So as we said, we need to add water is a kind of a resource which has been highlighted even in UN climate report, and it's a very important aspect that has been highlighted in the UN climate report. Out of the 5 aspects, and water is the important one. And when we talk about the chemicals, the first thing which is important to understand, where we need these chemicals, okay, why we need these chemicals, okay, and what kind of effluent has been come out when we treat the textiles or the garments of that. And I want to start with the statement that the textile effluent is a very toxic cocktail of inorganic and organic chemicals. So as Devyani mentioned, it is a heterogeneous mixture, and it's a very, very toxic cocktail of multiple chemicals, and it's having organic ones, inorganic ones, and the basic chemicals like acids, the alkalis, and all. So it is a complex effluent. It's not easy to treat the textile effluent because it is not with like a kind of 10 or 15 chemicals. Textile industry use almost a kind of 2,000 chemicals in their entire supply chain. So it is a very toxic effluent. And why we require these chemicals is because we want to treat our fibers, the yarns, the textiles to make it more appealing, to make it more comfortable, to make it more visually like a kind of appealing to the customer. And to do that, we treat the fibers, yarns, or textile with multiple chemicals at the multiple stages, starting from sizing, then desizing, then pre-treatment, then dyeing, then finishing, And again, the garment washing part of which is most like a kind of a creative, but use a lot of chemicals. And of course, there is a kind of people use responsibly the chemicals in the textile industry. But in case of the garment wet processing, because creativity is the main factor into that. So the number of chemicals used in the chemical wet processing is sometimes they use very hazardous chemicals like KMNO4 and a lot of acids, and which is very harmful for the environment as well as very harmful for the human beings that using the chemicals, and everything and then end up in an effluent. And there is a terminology which is based on computer. It's called GIGO, and it says garbage in, garbage out. So that is very relevant in case of textile effluent. So whatever you're going to put in your textiles for the treatment, or to make it dyeable, or to dye it, to make it the hand feel more softer, that's going to reflect in the effluent as well. And that's why it is very toxic effluent. And the chemical management plays a very important role to address this toxicity of the effluent. Because in the past, people are only concerned about the test on the garment, and that way it is they are concerned only about RSL, that is restrictive substance list. They are not at all concerned about the effluent, and they generally follow the brand's RSL, and they got it tested on their article, and if it is passing, then they are fine. So they are not concerned about the effluent which is coming out of their factory. They are only concerned about the chemical put onto the garment, and that to a particular brand. So if like H&M is saying this is my RSL, they are only concerned about the RSL on the garment. But a single factory is processing multiple brands, whether it's a global brand or a domestic brand. So if they are following H&M RSL, but they're not following that in different other brands, so the effluent comes out is a kind of a very toxic effluent. But after the introduction of the chemical management as well as MRSL, which said manufacturing restrictive substance list, now people are taking care of the effluent, because they are following the principle of input and the output. Okay, so after the introduction of this chemical management, people are developing the chemical inventory list, which is CIL, and based on CIL, they are identifying the whether chemical is hazardous or what is the risk factor of the chemical, how much it contributes to the effluent. And based on that, they are deciding their inputs for the textile, and they are getting the better output at the end. So the chemical management play a very important role in deciding what kind of effluent is being generated by treating the textiles.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that, Karun. Till we wait for Rijit to join us back, I just wanted to, you made a point about, that there is now increasing focus on chemical management and the chemical environment list. Can you just briefly touch upon, that where are we in that journey? Is this awareness increasing? Okay, sorry, Richard, I just sneaked in a question while I was waiting for you. Is that I was just asking Mr. Tyagi to elaborate a bit more, that he's talking about increasing chemical management, right? But where are we on that journey, right? And what, perhaps, maybe that we can come to later, but just try and understand that, where is that awareness? Do we need to do a lot more, etc.? It would be good to hear that.
Yeah, there is a lot of awareness if you talk about the chemical management and the MRSL and the guidelines, different guidelines which have been published, whether it is a chemical guidelines or a wastewater management guidelines. So there is a kind of awareness all across, and that is being gained a lot of momentum in last, I think, 4 to 5 years. And it is gained the momentum after the ZDSC published the report, which is based on the effluent that has been taken from China, and then they worked on Bangladesh and India and all. So it is gaining the momentum. People knows about this. There is a lot of stakeholders into that. Brands are playing important role, like H&M and other brands are playing very important role in creating that awareness and focusing how to implement those guidelines into the supply chain. So there is a lot of awareness, and I think almost now I can say very easily 70 to 80% people knows about what is the chemical management. Though there is a lot needs to be done in terms of implementation of the chemical management, because there is a lot of other variables, factors that comes into the picture when we decide on implementation part of any legislation or any guidelines or any like kind of things that is being implemented by the brands. But the awareness is there, people knows about it, but the implementation part is still a missing thing into that. And I can say 30 to 40% people implemented and they are taking it seriously, but there is a lot needs to be done, because as I said, there are a lot of variables that we need to understand. It's not only about implementation or forcing this legislation or forcing these guidelines. It's a lot about the variables, because textile industry, textile supply chain is having multiple and a lot of variables, whether you start with because when we talk about sustainability, I just want to drift a little.
We'll come back to
yeah.
you, Karun. We'll come back
Yeah.
to you in
Sure.
in a few minutes. And sorry,
Right.
there was some disturbance with my internet, so I had to
Sure.
I had to turn my camera down. Chadas, if I may turn over to you, and listening to what Karun has said, there is this growing realization. Of course, there is some work that has been done. I mean, let's focus for a minute on chemicals, if that's okay with you, specifically, and maybe also broadly on overall wastewater management. What Karun is saying is that there is this growing awareness, but of course there's a fairly long way to go when it comes to the implementation. And when we talk about implementation, there are two pathways. One is relying on the regulation, and you did talk about the challenge that we have in a country like India, which has a federal system, and different state governments have the responsibility towards management of water, not just the government but also the regulators in terms of monitoring, etc., etc. So that's one sort of way of looking at it in terms of the implementation, the regulatory framework. And the other is to see industry leadership, market-driven initiatives, whether they are standards, and Karun talked about ZDHC. There could be others as well. So, given that there are these two sort of two pathways for us to achieve desirable levels of wastewater management. It might be a difficult question for you if I said, can you tell us what has worked and on one side and what has not? But can you tell us, in your experience in India, how do you see the states evolving in the way that they manage wastewater or not, on one side, and also on the other side, how do you see maybe some market-driven initiatives, brand leadership, or sustainability standards coming into play? Do you see some movement in that direction, as Karun said, that we need to start focusing on implementation? Are there some signs that gives you confidence as a brand?
Sure. I mean, let me start with linking something with Mr. Tiegi said. I mean, one brand or one organization cannot do that much change. I mean, we have a saying in H&M. We said, being a clean fish in the dirty pond means nothing. So definitely we should have collaborative approach. We should have more stakeholders. We should onboard more partners, and we need to change not only our supply chain. We should change the sector. We should change the states. We should change the countries if we want to reach that. And regarding your question, I mean, Ideally, if you want a very short-term result, focusing on regulations and enforcements can make a difference. But if you are talking about a sustainable and long-term solution, then regulations, effective and functional regulations should work together with the market-driven incentives. That's the only solution, because especially at the wastewater part, we are talking about solutions that costs. It's not like renewable energy. Renewable energy, there is a positive cost factor which supports the implementation. But when it comes to the waste, it seems as a bigger cost. And to avoid that, of course, as a start, the clear regulations, functional and effective regulations and enforcements have a huge impact. But in the long run, with the other stakeholders, we should bring some market-driven incentives. And from our side, what I can say, we are supporting our suppliers, as I mentioned, with the projects, with some programs. We are expecting them to do some improvements, and according to that, we are calculating our sustainability index. And when it comes to sustainability index, together with the efficiencies and recycling, freshwater usage, nearly, and of course the extra effects coming to renewable and or energy reduction or chemical reduction coming from the water efficiency, we see that water programs or projects that our suppliers do can affect up to 50% of the environmental sustainability index, which will directly be linked with the order placements. So what we see is these kind of incentives, these kind of support, these kind of rewarding the responsible supplier will be the enabler. That's what we see. That's what should come. And when it comes to states or India overall, as I said, regulations on the paper are really strong. But if it's not being checked, or if it is not fairly checked, maybe for the big units it can be, but for the small ones there can be some lack in checking, then it creates a huge difference about how they got it and how they implement it. Because again, I will come to the cost point. Maybe everything will start very well, but after some time, if there is no incentives coming from any parties, then people will start to bypass. That's the biggest problem that I can see. And
Sure.
this is also showing bad practices. Even if the idea is really good, the thing that we want to reach is really good, the result will be not so good if we only focus with the regulations.
Sure. No, thanks. I think that's very clear. And, what you said, that absolutely there is, I think you highlighted 2 or 3 points. One is about, broader collaboration. I'll come back to you on that later, but let me turn over to Karun now. You talked about collaboration and the fact that a brand can't do it by itself. It needs to the industry, the ecosystem, and at least the supply chain actors, the value chain actors included, need to work together. But you also mentioned that there is a need for sort of industry leadership, taking leadership, whether it is by the brands, whether it is by the, if we stick to chemicals again, whether it is by the chemical industry, by the associations, by the important stakeholders. So, in your experience, Karun, how do you see some of the initiatives that have been undertaken by the industry, led by the industry, on addressing the challenge that we have, of sort of indiscriminate chemical use that you mentioned earlier, not just in terms of what type of chemicals are being used, and therefore the decoction of chemicals and inorganic, organic, voluntary organic compounds and all kinds of toxic heavy metals, etc., coming out of the effluent. So what kind of initiatives do you see the industry taking in that transformation towards greener chemicals or less harmful chemicals, or even enzymes, which seem to have, the market for enzymes seem to have also picked up over the last few years. And where is the challenge? I mean, if all the solutions are known, and the problems too, that if we continue to pollute the way we do, it is ultimately going to lead to closure of business and closure of and there are several examples across the country of how that has happened, where the government has become very very active in closing down polluting industries. So one, we already know, the industry knows about that, and there is a huge compliance cost. You have to run constantly to the NGT and all of that. So that cost benefit analysis, do you see companies sort of starting to do and say, well, there are these opportunities of brands like H&M who are ready to award and reward those companies who are moving into that zone. So what are some of those initiatives led by the industry which are coming through in your mind?
Yeah. So as I said, in the textile supply chain, there are a lot of stakeholders, starting from your fiber manufacturer to the yarn ones, the fabric, to the chemical suppliers, the garmenters, and the garment processing units. So there are a lot of stakeholders. So if I talk about from the perspective of the chemical company, yes, there are many positive things happening. As I said, in last 5 years, there are many positive things that is happening after the publishing of this ZDSC report. The detox campaign, and now all the chemical companies are following the international guidelines, globally defined guideline, whether it's a ZDSC guideline, or it's a GOT6, or it's cradle to cradle, or it's Ocotex Eco Passport. So all the major companies, chemical companies, are following those guidelines, and while following those guidelines, they are now shifting from the chemicals, from the hazardous chemicals, to the more safer chemicals. So the industry movement has been done in last 5 years from the uses of or the manufacturing of the hazardous chemical or to the more safer chemical. I cannot say it is being shifted to the greener chemical. Still, there is very less amount of greener chemicals available in the industry. So if you say, the industry has shifted towards the greener chemicals, that's not the case. They have not shifted to the greener chemicals there, but they are shifted to more safer chemicals, which was not the case 5 to 7 years back. And this is because of the awareness that is being created by the brands, the different stakeholders, the NGOs, that force the chemical industry to start the innovation to find the alternatives of the hazardous chemicals. So what happened in last 5 years, all the major companies, all the reputed companies are shifted from the hazardous chemicals or hazardous chemistries to the safer chemistry. Now what is happening, the change is now started to shift from the safer chemicals to the greener chemicals. And what I mean by the greener chemicals, as you know, the chemicals are being derived from crude. Okay, majority of the chemicals is derived from a crude, which is a non-renewable resources. And now there are various companies across the globe, and the company where I'm working on greener chemicals from the renewable sources. So we are going to use more or more renewable resources while making these biochemicals, what you say, or bio-based chemicals or the greener chemicals. So the shift is happening, but it is not that much. So it's hardly 5% of the entire chemical supply chain. So it's not to that extent. And there are a lot of factors into that, as you mentioned about enzymes. I'm talking about bio-based chemicals, probiotics, and other feedstock-based chemical. But as I said, there is a lot of variables in the textile supply chain and a lot of cost dependence.
Karun, sorry, you made a very, very important point, which I think is important for us to sort of get into a little bit more details. You said that there is this shift happening. Brands, because of the global campaigns and the discussion about the importance of sort of limiting the intensity of hazardous chemicals or moving towards less hazardous chemicals. Many brands, many of these players in the top of the of the value chain have already made that shift. But when it comes down, so two questions. One is, if I understand, so do you think that largely all the brands and all of the the players and the top of the value chain have made that shift overall? And if we assume for a minute that they have, and that there is this sort of expectation from them that their suppliers or the manufacturers that they would like to engage with should also make that shift towards less hazardous chemicals, and sort of desist from indiscriminate use of chemicals to ensure that wastewater can be effectively managed. Um, so how have the suppliers and manufacturers reacted to that sort of new demand of working with brands is terrible, with all due respect. Every month, every quarter, they'll come up with a new requirement. Something will happen in the headquarter, and they will say, "Well, we want to push this down the supply chain." And this is another. I mean, this is what we hear from the suppliers and manufacturers. Here is another new demand that from tomorrow you have to change to those new chemicals, which we don't even know whether they'll be useful. We don't even know whether they'll have an implication on the product. And eventually, again, the brand will say, "No, we have this rejection because your product is not up to the level of that appeal that we were hoping to get out of it." So, this is a very sort of isn't this a catch-22 kind of a situation where the suppliers and manufacturers are being prescribed to shift, but there are some real challenges that they also face. And can you talk about some of those real challenges? Why is that shift not happening towards less hazardous chemicals or more responsible use? You said maybe 5% of suppliers grossly is making that move. And I mean, this is interesting because this figure seems to be 5% seems to be there in many of our projects across different commodities, that the transformation seems to the clock seems to stop at around 5%. How do we shift the needle to 20, 30, 40, 50%? Where are we missing out, and how can we work together? Like Chagdas said, that there is a need for us to come together and create that kind of a buzz. So where do you see those challenges in this transformation?
Yeah, so as you rightly mentioned, all the challenges in your question. Okay, so everything you have mentioned in your question and is about bringing every stakeholders on a table. Okay, there is a very important thing, like 80% of sustainability, whether it's related to water or whether it's related to fiber or textile or chemicals, that is being made at the design stage of article or a textile on an article. So 80% of decision is being made when you decide what to buy. Okay, and that is in the hand of brands. Okay, and as rightly you mentioned that there is no single guideline. There is a multiple guideline. There is multiple RSL. Every brands have their own RSL. Some brand follows the ZDSC. Some brands follow Blue Sign. Some brands follow Ocotex. And there is a multiple, like I said, bombardment of compliance thing that is being put on the suppliers, and that's why there is a kind of constant demand from the supply chain stakeholders like manufacturer, the chemicals guy, to at least have a single guideline, and every brand should follow that single guideline. Okay, whether it's a topmost guideline that is being defined by H&M, or whether it's a ZDSC guideline, or whether it's a GOS 6, every brand should follow the single guidelines, which is for the benefit of the industry. But right now, that is not the case, because everyone is following different guidelines, and the compliance manager and the stakeholders needs to spend a lot of time and a lot of money, which is a very important aspect into that, because they need to spend a lot of money in meeting those different guidelines. The chemical supplier needs to implement those guidelines all across. So to meet those guidelines, they need to spend on certification. And of course, that cost will add on onto the chemicals. And if it is add on chemicals, it goes on articles. And that's not a case with the brands, where they said they need articles, sustainable articles. But yes, they cannot pay the incremental price. Yes, they can give some incentive. It's not like brands are not giving an incentive. They are giving the incentive, but the cost of incremental cost that is being arise from multiple brands. It's about the multiple brands putting their request to the suppliers, and that will add to the incremental cost of doing the business. And that's create an issue with the suppliers and with the chemical companies also, because when they're introducing a chemical, let's say a company introduce a green chemical, they need to get around 7 to 8 certification, because if for India it is required different, for Bangladesh it is required different, for H&M it is different, for another Gap it is different, somebody asks for cradle to cradle. So everything adds up to the cost, and that make it very difficult to implement the greener chemistries, and it will add on to the cost, because there is a cost of R&D also for the chemicals, and on the top of it, to meet those compliance factor is another cost that add to the cost to that.
I am
Thanks.
thinking a little bit different. Can I also?
Yeah, I will come to you. I will come to you. Yes, Shagdas. You heard the challenge at the on the ground, and we are aware of the fact that H&M has been working very closely with all your suppliers in building their capacity to make this transformation, whether it is on various aspects of sustainability. So how have your brand tried to address this challenge that Karun spoke about the need for support, and it does not necessarily always mean financial support. It means hand holding. It means capacity building. It means even ensuring that the suppliers, the owners, and the business leaders understand the business case. Long-term partnerships and stuff like that. So, in your experience, and you're absolutely totally aware of these challenges that are there in India, because H&M has been is a player which has been here for long, and would like to continue working here and expand your business. So how have your brand tried to address this problem of the support that is needed, and what advice do you have for other brands based on your experience? So yeah, over to you, Chalash.
Yeah, maybe I said, there are parts that I am not agreeing with Mr. Tiagi, but I can say most of the parts I agree in the start, I can definitely say. Chemical is something that is really crucial, because if we just focus on the cost of the chemical, it will not be enough. I mean, it's not sharing the real problem of the chemical. I mean, keeping it in the wastewater, discharging it to nature. Actually, the cost of the chemical is huge. I mean, not only the chemical is the cost. That's what I want to say. And when I hear the 5% of green chemicals, or not hazardous chemicals, or real good chemicals, let's say 5% is a good percentage, I have to say, because of the availability and the functionality of that chemical. So I think we also need to spend some time on R&D, work a little bit more, and in that sense, if I compare 10 years ago, I was dealing with chemicals at that time as well. Today, the picture is far, far better than that day. I mean, at that time, every brand have a separate thing. Now, most of the big brands, global brands, are actually aligned with ZDHC. Now, we have our MRSL, but we are focusing on following ZDHC's MRSL. And I know most of the global ones are doing the same way. So it is getting better, and it will be hopefully get better. But the thing that we need to understand in the chemicals is chemical subject is leave subject. I mean, when we start with ZDHC, the groups that we ban was, I don't know, couple of handful. But now we are talking about nearly 5 times or 20 times more chemicals, right? I mean, Mr. Tiagi knows better than me. So we ban some of the stuff, we phase out, and the replacement of that chemicals also banned after a couple of years, because that's the good part of, or the great part of sustainability. When you learn more, you see more things to correct, and it will go like that. And eventually, definitely, we will have a focus on the green chemicals when the green chemicals are also ready to, you know, onboard some of the chemicals that textile industry is using. We have goals to convert our suppliers 100% to compliant compliant chemicals. When we say compliant, I would just want to underline one thing. For us, the biggest concern, biggest problem is transparency. And unfortunately, transparency comes from the chemical suppliers. And up to a time, I can understand that those are secret, those are formulas, etc. But I think if we want to transform all the industry, I think we should invest on that transparency. Not only us, not only chemical suppliers, but also policymakers, governments. So we need to have that transparency, and with this transparency, automatically, I mean, even the incentives are not there, the correct chemicals, the greener chemicals, I don't like that using greener thing, but non-hazardous, let's say non-hazardous chemicals will be more promoted, I mean, automatically. Because in one sense, now everyone is talking at the energy side about carbon tax, right? Everyone is trying to add that, you know, costs in their costings even, because it will come. So I think the same will happen soon for water. It should happen, because that should be the way to you know, influence the parties that, you know, now the water is nearly free, right? I mean, you just get it from the ground, you're not paying anything. The only payment that you're, or the only cost that you're doing is the wastewater treatment. So if we bring that transparency, if we can create that systems that follow up this and support this, of course, in the long run with the incentives, I think that the percentage of the green chemicals will increase. I mean, maybe not in the short term to 50%. We also hope so, but eventually it should come. And regarding, I mean, just last edition, so sorry, I know the timing is quite critical. One thing, I mean, when it comes to brands, brands can be quite competitive. We have shops, and we are basically in a fight in that case about selling. But when it comes to sustainability, it's very easy to collect everyone. But what we need to focus, I'm not talking about brands, but everyone, all the stakeholder, including the government, everything that we are doing reactive is not helping. We need to start proactive. I mean, closing a industry in one state because of pollution is maybe a very good short-term solution, but it's just postponing one crisis. But we need to see, we need to follow up and aware of the problems that's coming in maybe in 2 years, 3 years, and start to decide on that. That's what we are trying to do in H&M, and most of the brands are doing that way. Some parts they are following us, some parts we are following them. That's again the good part. But the idea is not to be the clean fish in the dirty pond. If the pond is clean, then that's be meaningful for us.
Great. I'm sure we will get to a very, very clean pond sooner than later. Because in some of us love fish, so we have to have a good and a clean pond. You spoke about a few things, Shadas. I think they are very, very important. You mentioned about. I think what you mentioned is that there is reasons for us to be optimistic. One, that there is greater collaboration happening across brands. more and more convergence, the challenge that Karun spoke about, multiple codes, multiple standards. Brands are also conscious about that, and there is some level of leadership being taken by the brand to ensure that they are all sort of coming together. So that's very, very important. The other point that you mentioned was in terms of the supply side constraints. You mentioned that the supply of less hazardous chemicals is something that we need to work on, and perhaps there is where policy, government policy can play an important role to provide some incentives for enterprises that want to get into that line of business and see how that can be promoted. And finally, you also talked about the stick, the fact that carbon tax is now universally accepted, and there is also probably a need to move into that direction with water use and water efficiency, because it's a finite source, and we all know about that. So thanks a lot for those sort of inputs. I think these are very, very useful and critical areas, and I'm sure Devyani, these will help us in sort of designing the sort of the ask that we want from this initiative. Karun, if I may turn over to you for the last. I'm conscious that we are off time, but still, I think we still have some participants. So for your just to close out, where do you see consumers in all this? Consumers are so far away from where all the action happens, whether it is the usage of chemicals in the consumers so far away. I don't even know how many chemicals were used in ensuring that the shirt is so white. And I'm probably wearing an inappropriate shirt for this call today. But I don't know. There is no information available to me to say that I know this shirt did not use that amount of chemical. Do you see we anytime soon are going to get to that level where both the brands and the consumers are going to start questioning each other about our interest in ensuring more efficient production in the textile sector is into this conversation?
Yes. Yeah. Sure. There is a hope, and what we all need to do, if we talk about from the perspective of different consumers across the globe, when you talk about the US citizens, or when you talk about a UK citizen, or when you talk about Indian citizen. So what is the most important thing here is to create the awareness about the sustainability, and not just by meaning terminologies or by greenwashing to sell the products. The important thing is to make a genuine awareness to the consumer. And what is important here is to create the transparency and the traceability of the articles, what they are going to wear. So this is a very important factor, that you need to create the transparency about the supply chain to the consumer, and the traceability also. Traceability is a very important factor. When consumer knows what he is getting, when he is able to trace it properly, what chemicals is being used, or from where the cotton is being sourced, or what are whether the workers that made this garment is being paid fairly. So if we can trace, and there is a transparency into that, customers are love to pay little extra on to buying those kind of garments. And to do so, it is a kind of awareness that needs to be created, because consumers are also a part of a supply chain, because ultimately they are going to buy the garment. So we need to consider the consumer as a part of a supply chain, not just as the people buying the articles. So we need to consider them as a part of the supply chain, and aware them. And it is happening through the big data thing, where now there is certain kind of codes available where they can scan and find out the source of cotton, what kind the vendors, where it has been made. but it is very minimal. It is not like I can say it is hardly 0.1% or point even less than that. So the point is to create the awareness with the transparency and traceability.
Thanks a lot, Karun and Shadas. I know we've run out of time, but I wish we could continue this conversation further. And this has been a very, very fascinating conversation. And I'll personally take it up with both of you, because it's been a very learning sort of a dialogue for me as well. Devyani, you said that I should also try and summarize some of the key takeaways, and I'll try to attempt that at a very macro, at a more sort of broader level. I think the first thing that we heard from both Shadas and Karun is that there is reason to be hopeful. There is reason for us to hope that there is solutions are possible. So that's, I think, one of the most important sort of takeaways from this conversation. The second, and in connection to the first point, is that there are already practices which are happening, whether, and some examples were given by Shadas about, CTPs, industrial symbiosis, rainwater harvesting, some of these things which are already happening, water stewardship, and many others across the entire, in the apparel and textile sector. The third important point that was spoken about was that the needle has already started to shift, alas at a slow pace, but it is shifting. There are good practices. The use of hazardous chemicals is being looked at very closely by the industry, both by the supplier manufacturer, by the supplier of chemicals, and also by the brands and other actors in the value chain. There is a need to push this forward, and perhaps that is where I think sort of a campaign could be designed, where we bring, maybe in the next conversation we should also hear from the chemical industry, the chemical supplier, and some manufacturer, and not just here, but just to create that dialogue on what we are calling in various various aspects of our work, shared responsibility. This cannot be just the responsibility of only the brand, only the supplier, only the manufacturer of chemicals, only the government. But is there a possibility to create a framework on shared responsibility? What does this mean? What should the brand do? What could the suppliers do? What could the scientific community, the chemistry, the chemists, the chemical manufacturers do? What can the government do? I think that's another sort of a direction in which we need to move into. And finally, I think two important points. One, that in addition to that there is this need for collaboration and dialogue and continuous engagement, where we try to get everybody together, because it seems that there is still some information asymmetry across the different stakeholders. And finally, we also need to start thinking of what kinds of initiatives we should design, which will bring the consumers closer, and inform them about the opportunities and the possibilities for you and me to also start thinking about the long term of our purchasing behavior, of the way we sort of buy for what kind of demand should we raise when we are buying particular product. So these are some points, gentlemen and the lady, that I thought I could put on the table. And again, thanks a lot to both of you for a fascinating conversation, and look forward to learning more with you, and hopefully to be able to do something together going forward. So over to you, Devyani. Thanks a lot for the opportunity.
Thanks, Rajit, for hosting this wonderful conversation. And thank you, Jagdash and Mr. Tyagi. I think Rajit has summarized it quite well, and I'll not add on. But what I do take away is that it's a complex conversation, and it's something that we will need to keep talking and talking together and keep expecting changes to happen. And really, the idea is that how do we work together towards that change, and how do we prepare the industry for that change also. So, like Rajit said, I think there is a lot of scope for us to keep working on this, to have further conversations and see that, how we can take more positive action on this. And we'll definitely connect for that. And thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Devyani.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thanks a
Thank
lot,
you.
Shadas.
Thank you.
Thanks a
Bye-bye.
lot, Karun.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Devyani. Take care. Bye. And thanks to all the participants.
Yes.